All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Daily Power Parsha. I am your host, Rabbi Ari, and it is great to be here on a Monday, March 22nd, 2021. We are starting a brand new Torah portion, the Torah portion of Tzav, and I'm going to share my screen with you in a moment, and we're going to go through the verses. But the first thing is, I guess, by way of general introduction, this is the second portion in the book of Leviticus. And like the first portion in Leviticus, last week's Torah portion, it talks a lot about the offerings, the sacrifices in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. So a lot of the discussion is about the ancient sacrificial rite, if you will. But as I try to do, the goal here is not only to understand how it was done then, but also some contemporary layers of meaning and understanding that perhaps can ring significant for all of us. And hold on one second. Okay. All right, so that's the story. We're going to go through the Torah portion, the first two readings, and explore some of the context of the verses, but also the spiritual timeless meanings as well. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and let's jump right in. Okay, here we go. First thing we have on this page is the ad for the new Chabad.org Haggadah, which we will minimize. Okay. By the way, if you want that Chabad.org Haggadah, it's free for download on Chabad.org, and you can enjoy it there. Here we go. Torah reading for Tzav, Leviticus chapter 6, verse number 1. Here we go. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, this is going to be probably the most common verse in all of Torah. God spoke to Moses, and this is what he said. By the way, that last word saying is not just this is what he said, but God told this to Moses, saying that Moses is permitted and obligated to tell this over to the people, which is something we spoke about in other contexts. The idea that when somebody tells you something, if they don't tell you that you're allowed to share it, you're not allowed to share it. The default setting on conversation is private. It's only when somebody says, oh, no, I don't mind if you share it, that is permission to share it. In other words, we don't have to tell each other, oh, keep it a secret. In Judaism, at least, the default understanding is I'm telling you because I'm telling you. I'm not telling you to tell everybody. You know, if I want to tell everybody, I'll tell everybody myself. So hence the Talmud says that God spoke to Moses, lamar, saying, giving him permission to share this with others. Okay, let's continue. Here is the statement that he's meant to convey. Command Aaron, Moses' brother, and his sons, your nephews, the Kohanim, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. Now, the burnt offering we spoke about last week. One second here. Oh, it looks like it is already enlarged. Okay. So this is the law of the burnt offering. That is the burnt offering which burns on the altar all night until morning, and the fire of the altar shall burn with it. So interestingly, all the offerings had to be brought during the day. So they had to be sacrificed and brought during the day. But the parts that were burnt on the altar was allowed to be burnt overnight as well. In other words, ideally it was slaughtered and formally brought during the day. But if it wasn't able to be burnt on the altar, those parts that were meant to be burnt during the day, it could burn that entire night until the next morning. And that is exactly what the Torah tells us here. The law of the burnt offering is that it can burn on the altar all night until morning. That is kosher. That is kosher. By the way, that's one of the connections that we have with our Ma'ariv, the evening prayer service, where we're supposed to pray at night, but we have until the next morning, until daybreak, we can still pray the evening service. I'm not recommending that you pray the evening service at 5 a.m., but if you didn't beforehand and you find yourself at 5 a.m. looking for a service, you can still do it. All right, back inside. The Kohen shall don his linen tunic. That's that white robe thing. And he shall don his linen trousers on his flesh, And he shall lift out the ashes into which the fire has consumed the burnt offering upon the altar and put them down next to the altar. So when you burn something on the altar, it will leave ashes. So you take out the ashes, he scoops out the ashes from the burnt offering and puts them down next to the altar that it just burned on. He shall then take off his garments and put on other garments. So there's a wardrobe change, and he puts on other clothing, and he shall take out the ashes to a clean place outside the camp. So first the ashes are taken from on top of the altar and then placed next to the altar. Then they're moved out to a clean place outside the camp. Now, what does it mean outside the camp? Remember, this is when the Jews were living in the wilderness. They were living in the desert, and the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was in the center, and the Jews were living around it. The idea is you take this and you take it outside of the living space, you deposit it to a clean place outside the camp where no one's living in that immediate vicinity. Okay, what's interesting, I'm just going to point this out right here, right away, is the wardrobe change. The Kohen wears one set of garments while he's doing the sacrificial service, but when he takes out the ashes and deposits them outside the camp, he's supposed to put on different clothing. What's the meaning of this? So let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, about on the verse, he shall take off his garments. Rashi says this is not an obligation, but it's proper practice. In other words, it's just basic decency. That by taking out the ashes, he should not soil the garments in which he constantly officiates. Imagine if he was wearing his white linen tunic and pants and scooping out ashes and transporting them, long distance. At some point, it's going to get a little messy. So it's proper practice. It's just good etiquette or hygiene, whatever you want to call it. It's just good, clean practice to put on different clothing when taking out the ashes. By analogy, Rashi says, the clothes worn by his servant while cooking a pot of food for his master, he should not wear when he mixes a glass of wine for his master. In other words, when you're chefing in the kitchen, I'm making it a verb now, right? When you're cooking food in the kitchen, and things are, popping and splashing and splattering and whatever it is, it's getting all freilich in there. It's getting all exciting in the kitchen. You wear one set of clothing, but when you're serving, the glass of wine, mixing a glass of wine. The reason why I call it mixes a glass of wine is back in the day the wine was very thick and they used to actually mix water with it. That's just the way the old ancient wines were. But that's done typically in front of the master. So you wouldn't serve the wine glass in the same clothing that you were in the kitchen, with the whatever. You just a different, a butler wears, maybe a tux or whatever it is, just a bit of a fancier look. Hence the verse continues, and put on other garments inferior to those garments of the kuna which he had been wearing until now. So the garments that he's putting on, the new garments that he's wearing to take out the ashes, should be less nice than the ones in which he's doing the service. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait a second. Doing the service means slaughtering an animal and putting it on the altar and burning it. You're telling me that doesn't get dirty? Okay, fine. But yes, maybe, I don't know. I would guess yes, but I wasn't there. But here's what I will say. There is still a decorum. There's still an idea of respect and dignity where, when you're schlepping out ashes outside the camp, you put on your other clothing, though, when you're actually serving in the serving. Yeah.
It would seem like it's the cleaning portion of the ritual. Correct. To prepare for the next ritual. You put on, your shmata. And
you're putting on, exactly. You're putting on the cleaning, the overalls. The cleaning clothes. Exactly. The big gloves,
Is there any sacredness to the ashes?
Well, yeah, because it was part of the sacrifice. So every part of the sacrificial, experience retained a measure of holiness. Now, at the end of the day, we can't be so sentimental to keep all the ashes of all the offerings because, then you don't have an altar anymore. You just have a mound of ashes. So somebody had to be taken out. But notice that it was taken out to a clean place, right? So it's a makom tahar in Hebrew. Tahar is not just physically clean, it means spiritually clean. So it is taken out to a special designated place for this. By the way, this was let's look at the next Rashi. Rashi here describes the process by which the ashes were cleaned out. By contrasting verse 3, he shall lift out the ashes, and verse 4, he shall take out the ashes. We see that there were two distinct obligations with regards to removing ashes from the altar. Number one is Trumas Hadeshin, which is the lifting out some of the innermost ashes from the altar and placing them next to the altar. So one mitzvah was to take out some of the ashes and put them next to the altar. And B, the second mitzvah was taking out the heap of ashes from atop the altar when they became overflowing to a place outside the camp, which would be the cleaning part of it. Thus, our verse here, he shall take out the ashes, refers to those ashes which were heaped up in the apple-shaped pile of ashes on the altar. I guess the apple shape means that it made like a mound. I love the imagery. I don't picture an apple, but it was like, eventually the ash pile became great. So when this pile became so large that there was no longer any room on the wood pile is where they would actually burn the offering. So when the ashes overwhelmed the wood pile, he would take it out of there. Now, this was not a daily obligation, but lifting out some of the innermost ashes was a daily obligation. So essentially, there were two obligations. One, to take out a representation of the ashes and place them next to the foot of the altar. So you take them off the top and put them next to it, some. And then a more pragmatic, as Joyce said accurately, a very pragmatic obligation. You got to clean off the altar. So you take it and you clean it out. It's still holy. It's still sacred. It still part of the offering. But at that point, it's more of a pragmatic consideration. So you put on your work clothes, your cleaning clothes to do that. So Rashi clarifies for us the two obligations that we find in verse 3 and 4. Verse 3 is the one that talks about putting the ashes next to the altar. That was a little bit, and that was done every day. And then verse 4 is when necessary, take them out of the camp. Let's continue, and I have some insights to share on verses 5 and 6, but let's read them first. And the fire on the altar, right? You can't burn the offerings if you don't have a fire. The fire on the altar shall burn on it. It shall not go out. That means it should never go out. The Kohen shall kindle wood upon it every morning. In other words, every morning you add more logs of wood to that fire. It was a big fire. And upon it he shall arrange the burnt offering and cause the fats of the peace offerings to go up in smoke upon it. If you recall, a burnt offering is completely placed on that altar to be burnt, whereas in a peace offering, the meat most of it is eaten by the Kohen or the person who brought it. It's only the certain fats and certain diaphragm, the liver, the kidneys, whatever, certain parts of the animal that were burned, but primarily it was actually eaten. Either way, the bottom line here is that there always needs to be a fire burning on the altar. It has to be stoked with wood. I don't know if stoked is the right word. It has to be fueled with wood. More wood has to be placed on it every single morning, every single day. And verse 6 kind of repeats the obligation. A continuous fire shall burn upon the altar. It shall not go out. And again, that means never. It should never go out. There should always be a fire burning, even if there were no offerings to burn, nothing in the pipeline. It's a quiet day at the temple, perhaps. Doesn't matter. Fire always has to burn. These verses have a beautiful spiritual, timeless understanding, and I'll share that with you. Every one of us has a soul, and we have a heart inside of us. And the message is, and that's our altar. And the idea is that there should always be the fire of our soul, the fire of our warmth, our vitality, our emotion, right? It should always be burning. It should never go out. But how do you make sure that the inner fire, the spiritual fire, spiritual passion doesn't go out? How do you make sure? Every morning, you have to bring the wood upon it. In other words, there's no shortcut. Every day, day in and day out, you have to keep on fueling that fire. So a person thinks, all right, I have a soul, I have a connection, I feel for my Judaism, I'm good. So I can take a few days off, a week off, a half a year off, whatever. I know who I am. Yes, the core identity doesn't change and never changes 100%. But If we want to be passionate, if we want to be on fire, there's no shortcut. It takes a process, a manual process of putting the wood on the fire every single day, but specifically every morning, as I've spoken about many times. The best time of the day to plug in spiritually is in the morning. The mind is fresh, even if we wake up and we're a little bit tired still or whatever. But as we get into the day, halfway through the day, 2 p.m., 3 p.m., it's much harder to focus and align spiritually than it is in the morning. So the idea here is that it's the daily effort, the consistent daily effort of putting that wood on the fire spiritually that keeps the fire burning. And it's a mitzvah that it should not go out. Should always keep it burning. Yes, Don.
So I'm a little confused. If this is a meal offering and it gets to the point where there's just ashes left, then why was it eaten by the priests?
This is no, it's not the meal offering. This is he talks here about the burnt offering. Now remember, the burnt offering could be brought from cattle or sheep or goats or birds, or a meal offering, the flour could be brought. But with the meal offering, the Kohen would only take the 3 fingerful of flour and drop it onto the altar. So that was,
So then if it's the burnt offering, the priest could eat it, the meat.
No, not the burnt. No, burnt offering was burnt completely on the altar. The peace offering, right? Why is it called peace offering? Because everybody was happy with it. So that's the peace offering is the one in which primarily it was just the fats that were burned from the peace offering. So when it talks about the fire on the altar, so what is that used for? For the burnt offering in totality, because all of it was burnt, and for the peace offering, just the fats. But a little bit more than the fats. It was also some other parts of it. But with the meal offering, which we did mention last week, the meal offering, there was just a representation of that flour that was dropped in, and it made a smoke. It made a smoky, it went up in smoke on the altar. But either way, that's what the fire was used for. And to have the fire, you needed to put the wood on it. Now, I want to share with you one more deeper mystical insight on verse number 6. It really works better in the Hebrew. I don't know if it's going to work in the English. In the English, it says, a continuous fire shall burn upon the altar. It shall not go out. In the Hebrew, I'm going to read in the Hebrew. Eish tamid, a constant fire, tukad ala mizbeach, should be burning upon the altar. Lo sichbeh, should never go out. But according to the mystics, it means the following. Eish tamid, a constant fire, tukad ala mizbeach, should be burning on the altar. And then if that's the case within us, if our fire is burning on our inner altar, then the negative, lo means no, but it also means no equals negative, right? The negative within us, sichbeh, will be extinguished. So when we are on fire spiritually, then all of the no's, all of the negative, sichbeh, will be extinguished. So if you want to see how this might work in English, when a continuous fire burns upon the altar, then the no, right? The negative will go out. So the pessimism, the cynicism, the apathy, right? The coldness, the whatever, all the negative stuff, the negative traits that we have inside, the negative temptation, negative desires, all of that sichbeh burns up when we have that fire on the altar. So the fire is a passion for the right thing, but it also consumes the negative passion as well. All right, so that's a few mystical Hasidic insights into those verses about the fire. Let's continue inside. And this is the law of the meal offering. Oh, now we're getting to the meal offering. So now this is the law of the meal offering, that Aaron's son shall bring up before the Lord to the front of the altar. Right? So when a person brings a meal offering, and typically that was done when a person could not afford the animals or the birds or whatever. So a person brings the meal offering, it's brought to the front of the altar, and the Kohen shall lift out of it in his fist, right? Remember the 3-fingered fistful, from the fine flour of the meal offering and from its oil and all its frankincense that it is on the meal offering. So it was basically flour, oil, and some frankincense. So a scoop was taken, and he shall cause its reminder, which means a bit of it, the 3-fingered scoop, to go up in smoke on the altar as a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. So he would take a scoop from the bowl, drop it on the fire that was burning on the wood on top of the altar. It was a big fire, and it went up in smoke. And that, once again, pleasing fragrance to the Lord, God said, and we did. And Aaron and his sons shall eat whatever is left over from it, right? Not all of the flour is dumped out. There's a remainder of the flour, even though this could also be a burnt offering, or in the category of one of the options of a burnt offering. This is the example of a burnt offering, the one example that's not completely consumed on the altar, as I mentioned before. So in this case, when it comes to the meal offering, only part of it is burnt. It's burnt. I don't know if you could burn flour, but whatever is singed on the altar. The rest is eaten by Aaron and his sons, i.e. the Kohanim. It shall be eaten as unleavened bread. Right? Keep it as matzah in a holy place. It's not meant to take home and used in to make hot dog buns with it. It's not what's going on here. It's unleavened bread, and it's eaten in a holy place in the temple. They shall eat it in the courtyard. See, in the courtyard of the tent of meeting. You know what the courtyard of the tent of meeting is? That's that space, right? You have the retaining wall, if you will, of the Mishkan. You have the building inside, where you have the building, the covered building. Outside the building was the wash basin and the outer altar. In that area is where the rest of the flour can be eaten. You can take the flour and bake it as flat matzah and eat it there. And the priests eat it there, but that's the extent of what can be done with it. Once again, as we said last week, it shall not be baked leavened. It's perfect timing, right? I mean, we're getting ready for Pesach, so don't bake it leavened. Chametz, no chametz. As their portion, I have given it to them from my fire offerings. God says, I'm giving the priests, look at this. I'm giving it to them, God says, from my fire offerings, from my burnt offerings, I'm hooking up the priests with their portion. Only of this one. Remember, I said the burnt offerings typically are burnt completely. But when it comes to the meal offering, God says, I'm going to share a little bit. Maybe God doesn't like flour. I'm just saying, but God says, you know what? I'm going to share some of the flour with the priests. It is a holy of holies, right? It's a holy offering, like the sin offering and like the guilt offering. Any male among Aaron's sons may eat it. This is an eternal statute for your generations from the fire offerings of the Lord. It was the males that would typically serve in the temple and do the sacrificial rite. So they're allowed to eat it. The ones who are participating in it, eternal statute from all your generations, for your from the fire offerings of the Lord. Anything that touches them shall become holy. Look at that. Anything that touches the offering likewise becomes consecrated and cannot be used for mundane use. All right, so that's all the first reading, but today is Monday, which means that today is the second day of the week, and therefore we are going to jump into the second reading. Okay, let's continue. Let's jump right in. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, all these laws are relevant for the priests, by the way, not for Moses, but Moses is the one who carries the law and transmits it. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, this is the offering of Aaron and his sons, which they shall offer to the Lord on the day when one of them is anointed. So you with me on this? This is not an offering that the people will bring, that Aaron and his sons facilitate. This is the direct offering of the high priest or the regular priest on the day that they are anointed. It's their own personal offering. What do they bring on their opening day? Like, how do you inaugurate a new Kohen? How do you, what's the hazing? I'm kidding, it's not hazing, but what's the process like? So here you go, they bring an offering. What is it? 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour for a perpetual meal offering, half of it in the morning and half of it in the evening. It shall be made with oil in a shallow pan. After bringing it, scalded and repeatedly baked, you shall offer a meal offering of broken pieces with a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. Now, okay. Yeah. So the idea of perpetual meal offering, etc., means that any Kohen who will ever be appointed will bring does the same ritual. And the Kohen who is anointed instead of him from among his sons shall prepare it. Oh, I'm sorry. I think this is only talking about the high priest. I'm sorry. I think this is the high priest. I think it's Aaron, who was the first high priest, and his sons, when one of them is anointed as high priest. In other words, this is the high priest offering that is brought. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the high priest would bring this offering every single day. I believe so. Let's see if we can find.
Ari, I can add something on that.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, actually I have a note from Torah's Kohanim, what's that, Talmud? It says that Rashi explains the verse, speaks of two different meal offerings. The continual meal offering is that brought by the Kohen Gadol every day. Rashi cites verse 15 in support of this, for it explicitly refers to the meal offering of the Kohen Gadol as an eternal decree, an offering that is brought continually. But the meal offering brought on the day of inauguration is brought not only by the Kohen Gadol, but by Aaron and his sons. In other words, all Kohanim.
Got it. So thank you for clarifying. And I just found it here in Rashi as well on our screen. I just highlighted in blue. Everything that I said up until now is actually correct. Thanks for clarifying it. In other words, it is Aaron, the high priest. It is his sons, the regular priests. It's only done for the regular priests on the day that they are anointed. The high priest does it every single day. Does that make sense? So if you are not a high priest, you're just a regular priest, you do this once. If you're the high priest, you do it every day. What do? You bring this meal offering, right? With oil and a shallow pan, you scald it, you bake it, you break it up into pieces. Sounds like a Seder. Next, aside from the oil and the scalding. Next, and the Kohen, who is anointed instead of him from among his sons, right? So when you get a new Kohen Gadol, a new high priest, he shall prepare it. This is an eternal statute. It shall be completely burnt to the Lord. So this one is completely offered and burnt. Because it's a Kohen offering, so it's not going to go to another Kohen. It goes straight completely to God and burnt on the altar. Every meal offering, verse 16, every meal offering of a Kohen shall be completely burnt. It shall not be eaten. Now, the meal offering of a regular individual, a non-Kohen, some of it is dropped on the altar and the rest is eaten by the Kohen. But if the meal offering is coming from a Kohen, whether on the day of their inauguration or the high priest every day, that meal offering is completely burnt, not eaten. Let's continue. Verse 17. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law of the sin offering. The sin offering shall be, no, we talked about sin offering last week. Sin offering was different than guilt offering. Sin is about the thing that was done. Guilt is about the individual. I'll say that one more time. Sin offering is when a sin is committed. A guilt offering is when a person is guilty of a sin. So a person might commit a sin but not be guilty because you did it by accident. So I'm sorry, I'm not guilty because I did it by accident, but a sin was done. That is when a sin offering is brought. It's for an unintentional sin. So the Torah now circles back, God circles back to give us more details. This is the law of the sin offering. The sin offering shall be slaughtered before the Lord in the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered. Same place where the olah, the burnt offering, is slaughtered. That's where the sin offering is slaughtered. It is a holy of holies. Again, that means that it is something that needs to stay in the temple, and it's anything that touches it becomes holy as well. It's kodesh kodashim. The Kohen who offers it up as a sin offering shall eat it. So the one who actually brings it as a sin offering shall participate in the eating of it. It shall be eaten in a holy place in the courtyard of the tent of meeting, again in that temple or tabernacle space. Anything that touches its flesh shall become holy, like we said before. And if any of its blood is sprinkled on a garment, ooh, look at this. If any of the blood of the sin offering ends up on a garment, right? The area of the garment upon which it has been sprinkled, you shall wash in a holy place. Take a look at that. Take a look at that. I'm going to show you some Rashi on that. I thought there was a Rashi here. There's a Rashi, I believe, elsewhere. But either way, it has to be washed. It cannot be worn. with blood sprinkles from the offering, because it's considered to be holy. So you have to clean it, and then you can move on. Let's continue. An earthenware vessel in which it is cooked shall be broken. So again, the sin offering is allowed to be eaten by the Kohen. It's not all burnt. Part of it is also eaten by the Kohen. So imagine the Kohen takes the meat, puts it into an earthenware pot, and cooks and makes, I don't know, whatever, some sort of meat thing in the temple, in the holy space, etc. But he used an earthenware vessel. What happens with the earthenware vessel after it's finished cooking? It needs to be broken. You have to break the pot. But if it's cooked in a copper vessel, it shall be purged and rinsed with water. You know why? This seems like a very odd law, but it's very important. The reason is because the meat of the sacrifice is absorbed, when you cook it, is absorbed into the earthenware vessel. This is something that we find in the laws of kashrut, which I'll speak about in a moment, laws of kosher. When you cook something in a vessel, so part of the thing gets absorbed into the walls of that vessel, so to speak, into the actual, vessel itself. Now, with an earthenware vessel, Jewish law tells us, and this is where it comes from the Torah, that once it absorbs, it can never really give out its absorption. It remains, the flavors or whatever it is, the flavor, the substance remains locked into that earthenware vessel forever. And since you cannot have any benefit from the sacrifice after the sacrifice is brought, so then you have to break the vessel completely, and you can't eat it after a day passes. So you can't use it to cook anything else, because the next thing that you cook, it's going to draw a little bit from that absorption, and it's going to get mixed into the food, and you'll be eating from an offering after the first day, and you can't do that. But if it's cooked in a copper vessel, that you can kosher. You can purge it. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick question.
Sure.
Then why is it on Passover or for Passover we boil metal utensils and metal pots? We don't just rinse them. We don't just clean them and rinse them.
That's what it means. Purge and rinse with water. Purge here means with hot water.
Oh, it does.
I don't know if Rashi says it, but that's what it means halachically.
Okay.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't say it here specifically. Rashi says purged means some like scouring. So it's a deep purge. But the way it's understood halachically is that in order for a thing to be legally purged, it can only be purged the same way that it went in. In other words, if it went in with heat, it has to be purged with heat. So if you cooked, let me find out where this is again. Okay, here, purged, right? If you cooked in the copper vessel and the heat of the fire that boiled the water that the thing was in is what got it into the walls of the copper vessel, to get it out, it has to be applied with fire once again, or at least with water, to release its absorption. So it has to be koshered. If it went in with heat, it has to come out with heat. But the problem is, so that could be at least koshered. Purging here again means with fire, and rinse with water, or at least with boiling water. But when it comes to an earthenware vessel, the idea here is that once it absorbs, it never really gives out its absorption fully. It always retains some of its absorption. Therefore, it needs to be broken in order to be, you can't be used again. There's a mystical insight on this. It says Adam was created from the earth, right? Adam, the first human being, was created from the earth, which means that human beings are earthenware vessels. And what that means is, just like the earthenware vessel, we absorb and we never really forget. We take in things, we hear things, we see things. And as much as we like to think that, no, we can forget and we can, move on, it's really hard. And the negative influences become part of us not for better, for worse, but for worse and for worse. And the only way to fix it is broken. What does that mean? Tshuva, repentance, to be brokenhearted, etc. And that can reshape the human being from the inside out. But an earthenware vessel is tricky. It absorbs and it doesn't give out. Let's continue the next two verses and let's get to chapter 7. Every male among the Kohanim may eat it. It is a holy of holies. Again, the males would typically be doing the service, so they are allowed to eat from the sin offering in the specified manner. But any sin offering, some of whose blood was brought into the tent of meeting to make atonement in the holy, shall not be eaten, it shall be burnt in fire. So if the blood was brought inside the tent of meeting, which seems like it is the wrong place for it to go, okay, right? The sacrifice is invalid and it needs to be burnt in fire, and it's no good, right? Rashi says, this verse teaches us that if one brings any of the blood of the sin offering to be sacrificed on the outside altar, inside the holy, inside that building, the sacrifice becomes invalid. The sin offering was meant to be brought on the outer copper altar in the courtyard. If you bring the blood or any part of that offering inside the temple building, and it's no good. The sacrifice is invalid. You don't eat it. It doesn't work. You burn it in fire and you start again. And that is the deal. Okay. Let's see how much more. Oh, just a few more verses. Well, all right. Let's finish off the second reading, and then we're going to close it out for today. So this is now chapter 7, verse number 1. And this is the law of the guilt offering. Guilt offering is not a sin offering. Sin offering is when a sin is committed, but you didn't mean to do it. Guilt offering is when you were guilty. You did it, right? Guilt offering. It is a holy of holies as well. They shall slaughter the guilt offering in the place where they slaughter the burnt offering. Same place, outer altar area. Its blood shall be dashed upon the altar. That's the outer altar all around. And all its fat he shall burn, he shall offer from it, the tail and the fat covering the innards, and the 2 kidneys, along with the fat that is upon them, which is on the flanks, and the diaphragm with the liver, along with the kidneys. He shall remove it. All those things are burnt on the altar. And the Kohen shall cause them to go up and smoke on the altar as a fire offering to the Lord. It is a guilt offering. Any male among the Kohanim may eat it. So part of it is the fire. Part of the guilt offering is offered as a fire offering on the altar, the fats and the kidneys, etc. But the rest may be eaten by any male among the Kohanim may eat it. It shall be eaten in a holy place, in that space, that temple space. It is a holy of holies. Like the sin offering that we just spoke of a moment ago, so is the guilt offering. They have one law. It's essentially, the process is done, it's essentially done the same way. Like the sin offering is the guilt offering. The Kohen who effects atonement through it, to him it shall belong. Yeah, you see that? The Kohen who effects atonement through it, to him it shall belong. The Kohen that brings it, that helps the person bring this offering, he's the one that gets to eat from it after it's brought. And the Kohen who offers up a person's burnt offering, the skin of the burnt offering, which is offered up, belongs to the Kohen, it shall be his. A little wrinkle. We said before about the burnt offering, the whole thing is burnt. Turns out it looks like the skin of the burnt offering actually did go to the Kohen. You got something out of it to make some leather. And any meal offering baked in an oven, and anyone made in a deep pan or a shallow pan, we talked about those different options last week, that also belongs to the Kohen who offers it up. It shall be his. Basically, the one who does the work should be the one that eats from it as well. You can look at it as, I don't know, compensation. It's not really compensation. It's more of like you're part of it, part of the experience. He eats it, and that's part of the experience. And any meal offering mixed with oil or dry shall belong to all the sons of Aaron, any like the other. So I guess a meal offering that's not a baked or cooked one, if it's just mixed with oil or dry, so that belongs to anyone who wants, no preference, doesn't specifically belong to the one who brought it. There you go. There's always a plot twist when you least expect it. All right, friends, this is the story of the offerings. Well, we're not done yet. Got plenty more to talk about. But you see how without a temple in operation, it becomes, a little bit harder to picture everything and harder to understand exactly how it worked. But hopefully my goal here is to go through the verses one by one and to more or less get an understanding about how it was meant to be done and how it was done for 1,000 years. Each temple stood for 400 years or so. The first one stood for 410 years, the second for 420. That's a total of 830 years of Jerusalem temple, the stone edifices, plus the Mishkan, Moses' tabernacle, 40 years in the desert. And then when Joshua came in, he brought it in with him. Good few hundred years of that Mishkan, of that tabernacle as well. So we're talking about at least 1,000 years of sacrificial service being part of Judaism. It's been a while, but this was a big piece of life. All right, Mark. Yes.
have something to add from Rashi, and I'm curious what your interpretation is.
Sure. I'm happy to make one up.
He's talking about the offerings. He says, or that is dry. In other words, there was a dry offering as well as an offering with oil.
Right.
And the dry offering Rashi says, this is the meal offering of a sinner.
Yes.
And the meal offering of jealousy, which do not have oil in them. And my question is, why?
Yeah, so the oil, I think we said this last week even, because the oil is making it fancy and flavorful and exotic. And the idea is when the meal offering is a voluntary offering, you make it beautiful, right? The person can't afford an animal or a bird, but he wants to bring a meal offering. Great, so you add oil and spices and it's nice. All right, but when a person's bringing a sin offering, you don't beautify it. You come humbly in with the meal offering. Likewise, the one that's the woman who's suspected of adultery, and it's to check out if she's innocent or guilty. That's also, since it's a bit of a questionable circumstance, so it's done in a very simple fashion and not in an exotic way. So that's, I thought I would have to make up something. I'm actually giving you the accurate answer. So look at that. You never know when that works out in a good way. So what's the bottom line? I want to go back to a few points. Look, again, a big part of the agenda, a big part of the objective is to understand the different types of offerings. And I think we have clarity, actually. We have the gift that's totally burnt. We have, and that could be an animal, sheep or goat or birds or the flour offering. We talked about shlomim. Some the Kohen eats, some the person eats, some the altar has. We talked about sin offering when a sin is committed, but I didn't mean to do it, so I'm not guilty, but a sin was done at the end of the day, right? We talked about a guilt offering when the person is guilty because they did what they shouldn't have done, and they're guilty for it. And we spoke about the various laws regarding these different offerings. So today, a few highlights, at least that stick out for me. Number one, the idea of fire. We have to have the fire burning on our inner altars. Keep the fire burning. And how does it stay burning? You got to stoke it with wood every morning, and that means study, meditation, and prayer, charity, mikvah, whatever it is, right? It's all about doing the daily things that keep us plugged in and keep us spiritually motivated. That's how the fire keeps on burning. So that's one point. Second point is when we have the fire burning, the negative tends to ease up and burn away, so to speak. So that's the second point. And what else do we talk about? Oh, and the final thing that I'll highlight, just to reiterate, is that we are all the earthenware vessel. And that means that we are very impressionable. Just like an earthenware vessel takes in, but never really gives out all the way. In other words, it always retains some of its influence or that which it was exposed to. So too with us, we take in and it creates an impression. So we should be careful as to what influences we expose ourselves to. That's the very simple life lesson. We should be careful, knowing that we are an earthenware vessel. Make sure that anything that goes into the earthenware vessel is kosher. Again, with the context of today's lesson, today's reading, it's not kosher or not kosher. It's an offering that's holy that can only be eaten for a day, for 24 hours. So the next day becomes off limits, and that messes up your pot because you can no longer use it because it's past the 24 hours. That's a technicality, but I'm expanding it to a bit of a broader interpretation, broader application. We are the earthenware vessel. We absorb. We should be very careful that what we allow in our minds, in our eyes, in our ears should be healthy and positive things. It's not the right word I was looking for, but it works. All right, so we should have influences. We should only have positive influences, and if not, a broken heart always works, like the broken vessel. All right, good to see everyone. Hope to see you tonight for jewelry. Mark, Joy, and Donna. We'll see you soon. Take care, everybody.